Imagine walking into a courtroom where every tick of the clock isn't just a reminder of time passing but a signal of injustice, a place where one man's urgent federal duty collides with a local system steeped in bias. Today, you're about to witness how one determined federal prosecutor dared to challenge the deep-rooted discrimination within a municipal court, sparking a movement that would shake the very foundations of the justice system. Stay with us as we reveal the astonishing details of this high-stakes encounter and ask, what would you do when the scales of justice are so blatantly unbalanced? A day that changed everything. Marcus Ellison parked his car outside the municipal courthouse in Greenville, South Carolina. The warm morning sunlight stretched long, slanting shadows across the asphalt as Marcus took a deep breath. Known for his meticulous nature as a federal prosecutor, punctuality was his creed. Yet, on this fateful morning, circumstances had conspired against him. His task for the day was seemingly routine: a simple case regarding an error in the property tax adjustment on the house his late grandmother had left him. That home, a cherished anchor of his childhood memories and moral lessons imparted under his grandmother's caring gaze, meant more than just bricks and mortar. It was a testament to a legacy he vowed to protect. Dressed in a dark navy suit with a crisp white shirt, Marcus embodied the image of a seasoned attorney. Despite the stress of an urgent federal matter that had delayed him a last-minute motion on a human trafficking case, he exuded a calm professionalism. His assistant had warned him earlier that the local judge was known for a strict approach toward tardiness. Marcus tucked his phone away, his mind focused on the evidence he'd gathered to contest the tax hike imposed without proper justification. With every step toward the courthouse, an undercurrent of determination and anticipation surged through him. Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere was worlds apart from the polished federal courtrooms Marcus was accustomed to. The municipal court's walls, painted a dull beige and scarred by decades of use, echoed with the shuffle of anxious people clutching documents related to parking tickets, minor disputes, and small claims. As Marcus navigated the narrow corridors lined with faded signs, he noted the unremarkable hum of daily routine. Despite the ordinary surroundings, an unsettling feeling had taken root in him ever since he saw that text from his assistant, a reminder of the judge's reputation for punishing even the slightest delays. Marcus soon found the correct courtroom and took a seat near the back, carefully reviewing his neatly organized evidence. Almost immediately, the door swung open, and Judge Donovan Reeves entered. With a commanding presence accentuated by his salt and pepper hair and piercing blue eyes, Judge Reeves did not need to say a word to command respect. The room rose as a sign of respect, and Marcus, mindful of every detail, joined in the silent salute. As the judge methodically called cases one by one with a tone that was both crisp and detached, Marcus couldn't help but notice subtle inconsistencies in the treatment of those before him. While some latecomers were barely acknowledged, his case would soon become the focal point of something much larger. When Marcus's name was finally called, he strode toward the podium with measured confidence, despite knowing that he was already behind schedule. The judge's gaze, sharp and unyielding, fell upon him, and the tension in the room grew palpable. "You're late, Mr. Ellison," Judge Reeves declared sharply, his voice cutting through the murmurs of the courtroom. "Do you think this court's time is any less valuable than your own?" Marcus raised his hand slightly in a gesture of acknowledgement. "Your Honor, I apologize for the delay. I was attending to urgent federal matters." Before he could elaborate further, Judge Reeves dismissed his excuse with a curt wave. "Excuses do not excuse tardiness. This court operates on order and respect. If you cannot abide by that, then perhaps you should reevaluate your priorities." The words hit like a blow, and although Marcus felt the weight of every gaze in the room, he maintained a composed exterior. Drawing in a steady breath, Marcus responded, "Your Honor, I understand the importance of timeliness. If I may, I'd like to present my case regarding the property tax adjustment." Yet, before he could continue, the judge interrupted again. "We will get to that after addressing the matter of contempt. Tardiness undermines the integrity of these proceedings. You are hereby fined $750. The words echoed in the silent courtroom like the clang of a heavy hammer. Marcus's jaw tightened, yet his expression remained impassive. Murmurs of disbelief rippled through the room as he attempted to speak. "Your Honor, may I explain?" But the judge's gavel fell, silencing him immediately. In that charged moment, Marcus realized that this was not merely an issue of punctuality, it was about a deeper, more systemic problem. As he returned to his seat, he began furiously scribbling notes, his mind racing. He compared the punitive fine he received with the leniency shown to others who had also arrived late. A casually dressed young woman near the front had slipped into the courtroom without a hint of reprimand, and another man, arriving well after the session had commenced, had been treated with barely a glance. The glaring disparity in the treatment of the latecomers was unmistakable. Even as Judge Reeves continued with the next case, Marcus's thoughts churned with a mixture of professional calculation and personal indignation. He knew that fines of such a magnitude for minor delays were abnormal, almost punitive in nature. Observing the varied reactions of those present, a mix of disbelief, discomfort, and quiet resolve, Marcus recognized a pattern he could no longer ignore. This was a moment that extended far beyond the inconvenience of a fine or a scheduling mishap. It was a clear manifestation of institutional bias. When his case was called a second time later that morning, Marcus approached the podium once again, his demeanor calm and deliberate. The judge fixed him with the same piercing gaze, a silent challenge awaiting his next words. Marcus began, "Your Honor, I have with me documentation regarding the erroneous property tax adjustment on my family home, a home that has been in my family for decades. The records clearly show that the recent adjustment is inconsistent with the long-standing assessment that was in place for 5 years." He opened his folder to reveal meticulously organized documents and photographs, pointing to a specific page that detailed the original tax assessment alongside the inexplicable 30% increase that had been imposed without proper notification. Judge Reeves leaned back in his chair with an air of detached indifference. "I will review it in due time, Mr. Ellison. However, your tardiness this morning is a matter we cannot overlook. Do you truly believe that the urgency of your federal responsibilities justifies disrespecting this court?" Marcus's response was measured and respectful. "Your Honor, I mean no disrespect. My delay was due to an urgent federal case involving human trafficking, a matter we all agree requires immediate attention." Yet, as the judge's eyes narrowed, his tone remained unyielding. "Your priorities, however noble, do not excuse breaking the rules. Court procedures exist for a reason." It wasn't merely the words that struck Marcus, it was the unspoken dismissal that followed. His professional achievements, his unwavering commitment to justice, and his effort to adhere to the system were all disregarded by a man whose authority seemed absolute. Taking a slow, deliberate breath, Marcus finally asked, "Your Honor, I understand the importance of rules. However, I must ask, are these rules applied equally to everyone in this courtroom?" His question, posed with quiet authority, sent a ripple of unease through the room. The judge's face reddened, and his grip on the gavel tightened. "Mr. Ellison, are you questioning the integrity of this court?" he demanded. Marcus, his tone steady and unwavering, replied, "I am only asking for clarity, Your Honor. As an officer of the law, it is my duty to ensure that fairness is upheld not just for me, but for everyone who comes before this bench." With that, the judge's gavel fell once more. "Your fine stands," he declared. Marcus inclined his head slightly, silently acknowledging the ruling while inwardly vowing that this incident would not go unchallenged. As he returned to his seat, the weight of the courtroom's eyes bore down on him. Yet, amid the tension, there were subtle signs of solidarity. A knowing glance from an older black gentleman 2 rows ahead, the hesitant yet determined look of the court clerk, and even the furiously scribbling notes of a young law student in the back. These silent gestures affirmed Marcus's conviction that what he had witnessed was part of a much larger, systemic problem. After the session, as the room slowly emptied, Marcus lingered. He observed the residual murmur of whispers and exchanged glances that spoke of a collective unease. There was an unspoken understanding among those present: the disparity in treatment was not an isolated incident but a recurring pattern. Stepping outside into the crisp air, Marcus paused on the courthouse steps, his eyes scanning his phone. His thumb hovered over the contact for his assistant at the U.S. Attorney's office. Yet, he whispered quietly to himself, "Not yet," as he reviewed the notes he had taken, determined to compile every detail of this injustice. Back in his car, Marcus retrieved his badge and credentials from his briefcase, the embossed emblem catching the sunlight as if to remind him of the honor of his position. He knew that this incident was far more than a personal grievance. It was a spark that could ignite a movement against systemic bias. With each detail of the morning's proceedings replaying in his mind, Marcus began formulating a plan that would not only challenge the punitive fine but would also expose the structural inequality festering within the local judicial system. Later that day, as he re-entered the now quiet courtroom to file additional documentation, the tension was still palpable. The room was nearly empty, with only a few lingering clerks and stragglers. Judge Reeves was still there, poring over a stack of documents with an air of weariness that seemed uncharacteristic for a man known for his strict adherence to rules. As Marcus approached the bench once again, the court clerk, Ms. Watkins, looked up from her keyboard with a mixture of apprehension and relief. Judge Reeves, now more subdued, addressed Marcus in a clipped tone, "The session has concluded, Mr. Ellison. If you have further business, you will need to schedule an appointment." Marcus, with quiet authority, replied, "Your Honor, I believe it is important that I formally introduce myself. I am Marcus Ellison, Assistant United States Attorney for the Northern District of South Carolina. I have served with the Department of Justice for over a decade, focusing on human trafficking, corruption, and civil rights violations." As he held his badge up for all to see, the room fell into a stunned silence. For a brief moment it was as if every eye in the courtroom registered a new reality, one where a man who had been treated harshly earlier now asserted his position with undeniable authority. A hush fell over the room as Judge Reeves' expression shifted from irritation to something akin to disbelief. "You were late because of a federal case?" the judge asked, his tone now laced with a mixture of uncertainty and indignation. Marcus continued firmly, "Yes, Your Honor. And while I respect the rules of this court, I cannot ignore the stark disparity in how tardiness is met with punitive measures in some cases and leniency in others." His words, measured and resolute, resonated with the growing murmurs of agreement among those who had witnessed the morning's events. In the days that followed, Marcus threw himself into a meticulous review of the municipal court records. He pored over public documents and compiled extensive evidence that revealed an alarming trend: black defendants were consistently fined at rates significantly higher than their white counterparts for similar infractions. The data was irrefutable. There was a systemic bias at work. Marcus reached out to colleagues, community advocates, and even former defendants. Their stories, many shared in whispers and with palpable trepidation, painted a damning portrait of injustice. One young black woman recounted being slapped with an exorbitant fine for a minor parking violation, while a white man with similar infractions had received only a mere warning. Another witness detailed how the judge would often cut off black defendants, denying them the opportunity to fully explain their cases, while affording white defendants ample time to present their side. As Marcus's investigation deepened, so did the public outcry. A courageous court clerk, Ms. Watkins, who had long been troubled by the inequities she observed, finally gathered the courage to present a small, leather-bound notebook filled with her private notes. "I've recorded every discrepancy, every instance where I felt the system failed," she confessed quietly to an investigator. Her detailed entries, documenting dates, names, and patterns of bias, became a crucial piece of evidence. Robert Hayes, a veteran bailiff who had served in the courtroom for over 15 years, also came forward. With quiet conviction, he revealed, "I have witnessed this treatment for years. I always knew something was off, but I never imagined it would be this blatant." Word of Marcus's findings soon spread beyond the courthouse walls. A determined young law student, whose impassioned notes during the hearing had captured every detail, shared her account on social media. Her post quickly resonated with thousands, igniting a viral movement under hashtags like #EqualJusticeNow and #BiasInTheCourts. Testimonies poured in from across the community, each one adding weight to the growing evidence of systemic discrimination. Local news outlets picked up the story, broadcasting headlines such as "Systemic Bias Unveiled," "Federal Prosecutor Takes a Stand," and "Inequality in the Courtroom Exposed." Within days, Marcus found himself inundated with media requests. Reporters and legal analysts clamored for his insight, yet he remained focused on the task at hand, ensuring that every instance of bias was thoroughly documented. His persistent efforts soon led to an official investigation. The state's Judicial Review Commission, alarmed by the mounting evidence, initiated a formal inquiry into the practices at the municipal court. Investigators requested years of case records and conducted interviews with court staff. Among those interviewed was Ms. Watkins, whose courageous revelation of her long-hidden notebook helped corroborate Marcus's claims. Likewise, Robert Hayes' testimony confirmed that Judge Reeves had, for decades, imposed harsher penalties on black defendants compared to white defendants. As the investigation unfolded, it became increasingly clear that Judge Reeves' conduct was not an anomaly, but rather indicative of a much larger, systemic issue. The Commission's preliminary report was damning. It detailed how, over the span of 5 years, black defendants had been fined on average 300% more than white defendants for equivalent offenses. White individuals often received mere warnings or lenient treatment, while black defendants faced immediate and severe repercussions, including steep fines and dismissive treatment. The report recommended sweeping reforms, including mandatory bias training for judges, regular audits of court decisions, and the creation of independent oversight committees tasked with ensuring accountability in every courtroom. Faced with the mounting evidence and the prospect of a public hearing, Judge Reeves found himself increasingly isolated. Initially dismissing the allegations as mere misinterpretations, he eventually had no choice but to address the issue publicly. In a rare statement, he expressed regret for any unintentional harm his actions might have caused, though his apology came across as hollow in the face of the overwhelming evidence. Meanwhile, Marcus, despite the relentless pressure from the media and the legal community, maintained his focus on the case. Late into the night, he meticulously compiled a comprehensive report, including every observation, every witness testimony, and every piece of evidence he had gathered. Within a week, the impact of Marcus's investigation became unmistakable. Community activists organized rallies outside the courthouse, demanding accountability and reform. Protesters held signs emblazoned with messages such as "Justice should be blind" and "End bias now." The media continued to broadcast the unfolding story, and soon the local community was abuzz with discussions about fairness, equality, and the urgent need for change. Marcus was invited to speak at several community forums and legal conferences. In every speech, he emphasized that the law was not simply about rigid rules, but about the lives of real people, lives that deserved to be treated with dignity and respect. As the pressure mounted, systemic reforms began to take shape. The municipal court, once a symbol of entrenched bias, underwent significant changes. The tired beige walls were repainted, and a new, welcoming reception desk was installed. Informational signs in multiple languages were placed near the entrance, directing visitors to available resources such as legal aid, payment plans, and procedural guides. In a symbolic gesture, a small plaque reading "Equal justice is everyone's right" was mounted in a prominent spot near the entrance. More importantly, the judge himself was replaced. Judge Reeves quietly stepped down from the bench, and in his place, a younger, more progressive jurist with a reputation for fairness assumed control of the courtroom. Marcus's influence extended far beyond the walls of the courthouse. His relentless pursuit of justice had sparked a movement that resonated with communities across South Carolina and even further afield. Local state judicial review boards began to implement mandatory audits of case outcomes, paying special attention to racial and socioeconomic disparities. Oversight committees, composed of legal experts, community advocates, and former defendants, were established to monitor court proceedings and ensure that fairness was not just an ideal, but a practiced reality. Among those inspired by Marcus's unwavering determination was a group of young law students who, moved by his courage, started a civil rights clinic in his honor. Their enthusiasm was palpable as they organized workshops, mentorship programs, and community outreach events. One particularly memorable day, after one of his lectures at a local law school, a bright-eyed student approached him. "You've shown me that the law isn't just about rules, it's about people," she said, her voice trembling with hope. "You've given me a reason to fight for justice." Marcus smiled humbly, acknowledging the powerful impact his actions had on the next generation of legal minds. Even those who had once operated behind the scenes began to step forward. Robert Hayes, the veteran bailiff, took on a new role as the leader of bias training sessions for new court officers. In one session, he addressed a group of freshly hired officers with quiet passion: "Our job isn't just to maintain order. It's to ensure that every person who enters this courtroom is treated with the dignity they deserve. If you see something wrong, speak up. Silence is complicity." Meanwhile, Ms. Watkins, whose careful documentation had been instrumental in unveiling the systemic flaws, was promoted to oversee a new ethics program designed to mentor younger clerks and prevent past mistakes from repeating. Marcus, now recognized not only as a federal prosecutor but as an agent of change, began teaching a seminar on judicial ethics and civil rights at a local law school. His classes were filled with eager students who hung on every word, inspired by his first-hand account of the struggle for justice. "Listen to each other," he often said. "The voices of those who come through our courts, especially those too afraid to speak up, are the ones that drive real change." His words resonated deeply, igniting lively discussions and sparking initiatives aimed at reforming an outdated system. Months later, the courthouse in Greenville had transformed dramatically. The once bleak interior was now vibrant with fresh paint, modern furnishings, and clear, accessible signage. The changes, though largely cosmetic at first glance, symbolized a deeper commitment to fairness. More importantly, the systemic reforms Marcus had fought for were now being rigorously implemented. Audits revealed that racial disparities in fines and sentences had significantly decreased. Payment plans became more accessible, and defendants reported feeling respected and heard in the reformed system. One day, as Marcus walked back into the now revitalized courthouse for an event, he paused at the entrance. Hanging on the wall was the framed copy of the $750 fine he had received that fateful morning. It was no longer a symbol of punishment, but a reminder of why he had taken a stand. Beneath the photo was a candid snapshot from a recent event, a group of young law students smiling and united in their mission for change. That image, vibrant with hope and determination, reinforced Marcus's deep sense of responsibility to the community and to the future of the justice system. At a major public forum held in the renovated courtroom, Marcus stood before an audience composed of judges, lawyers, clerks, and community members. As he addressed the crowd, his voice carried both authority and warmth. Justice, he said, is not just about the strict application of rules, it's about ensuring that every person, regardless of their background, is treated with fairness, dignity, and respect. His words struck a chord, and as he spoke, he saw nods of agreement, determined faces, and a shared resolve to continue the fight against bias. In the weeks that followed, the momentum only grew stronger. Activists from neighboring communities organized rallies, and legal watchdog groups began to use Marcus's case as a model for reform across the state. The public's reaction was a mixture of hope and determination, as countless voices joined the call for a more equitable system. Marcus's investigation, his unwavering commitment to truth, and the evidence he had painstakingly gathered culminated in significant changes that resonated on both local and national levels. In an emotional moment at one of the reform panels, an elderly gentleman who had frequented the courthouse for decades stepped forward. For 40 years, he said, his voice thick with emotion, I watched injustices unfold, and I never believed change was possible. Today, I stand here and say thank you for showing us that justice can prevail. His words, simple yet powerful, captured the hearts of everyone present. And just as the crowd began to applaud, another call came in, a message from a young public defender in Chicago who had been inspired by Marcus's story to launch her own investigation into bias in her local courts. As Marcus sat back in his modest office that evening, reviewing emails, letters, and recorded testimonies, he realized that his battle had grown into a nationwide movement. Every piece of correspondence was a reminder that the struggle for equal justice was shared by thousands. He compiled the evidence meticulously, labeling each file with care and preparing to submit his findings to the state judicial board. The next morning, as he opened his email and saw a new message from his supervisor, Julia Matthews, a no-nonsense attorney with decades of experience, Marcus listened intently. The findings so far are staggering, she said. If what you're describing is accurate, this is not an isolated incident. We're looking at systemic bias. Marcus replied with quiet determination, it wasn't too subtle, Julia. It's part of a pattern I have seen before. I'm not alone in this. Her voice on the phone resonated with urgency. We're taking this to the state judicial board, and the media is already hot on the story. Be prepared for what comes next. With that call, Marcus knew that his work was only just beginning. Every detail, every observation, and every account of injustice would fuel the momentum for sweeping change. As the investigation deepened, more revelations came to light. Former defendants bravely recounted their experiences in court, some choosing to remain anonymous, while others spoke publicly of the injustice they had suffered. One case involved a black mother who had been fined $500 for contesting a minor zoning issue, even though she had provided clear evidence that the city was at fault. In another instance, a young man recalled how Judge Reeves had publicly humiliated him in court, questioning his work ethic, while dismissing a nearly identical case involving a white defendant with barely a word. The evidence was not just numerical, it was a chronicle of personal suffering and institutional disregard. Community meetings were held, and town halls buzzed with discussions about reform. Lawmakers, judges, and community activists all came together to debate the necessary changes. Over time, mandatory bias training was instituted not only for judges but for all court personnel. Independent oversight committees, composed of experts and community members, were established to monitor every decision made in the courtroom. And while there was some initial resistance from those who had long enjoyed unchecked authority, the undeniable improvements in fairness and transparency could not be ignored. Marcus continued to appear at public forums and speak passionately about his experiences. At one memorable event, he stood before a large crowd in a packed auditorium and said, "When we stand up for justice, when we challenge the system even when it seems all-powerful, we ignite change that reverberates far beyond these walls." This is not just about one fine or one courtroom, it is about the dignity of every person who walks through these doors. His voice was both firm and empathetic, and the audience responded with a resounding applause that echoed through the hall. In the months that followed, as reforms took deeper root in Greenville and other communities, Marcus found himself not only fighting for justice in the courtroom but also inspiring a generation of legal professionals and community leaders. He mentored young attorneys, advised civil rights organizations, and even returned to the law school lecture halls to share his insights on the importance of integrity and impartiality in the justice system. His personal journey from being fined in a biased municipal court to spearheading a movement for systemic reform became a beacon of hope for many who had long felt disenfranchised by a broken system. One crisp autumn day, as Marcus prepared for another lecture, he paused to reflect on how far the community had come. The once gloomy courthouse was now a symbol of renewal, its vibrant interior and new programs a testament to the collective will for change. Outside, the chatter of community members discussing the recent reforms and the promise of a fairer future filled the air. Marcus knew that the battle was far from over, yet he was filled with cautious optimism. Every small victory, every act of courage, and every public testimony had built momentum that could not be easily halted. As he looked around, Marcus saw familiar faces, former defendants who now smiled with relief, law students inspired to push for further reforms, and even some of the court personnel who had once hesitated to speak out. Their shared determination was palpable. It was a reminder that when people come together and demand accountability, even the most entrenched systems can be transformed. In a final public address at the unveiling of a new judicial ethics center named in part to honor the spirit of his efforts, Marcus stepped up to the podium. With a steady gaze that swept across judges, lawyers, clerks, and community members, he began, "Justice is not a static concept. It is dynamic, ever-evolving, and it demands that we remain vigilant in our pursuit of fairness and equality. We have witnessed change today, but the journey is far from complete." His words, delivered with sincere conviction, reverberated through the crowd. The applause was thunderous, yet Marcus's parting words resonated even more. Every one of us has a role to play in creating a system that upholds dignity, fairness, and respect for all. As the session ended and people began to file out, the impact of that day lingered like an indelible mark on everyone present. Marcus, now a figure of quiet strength and steadfast resolve, left the courtroom with his head held high. He had not only defended his own rights but had ignited a spark that would challenge and ultimately change a biased system. The echo of that morning's injustice had evolved into a movement, one that promised to bring lasting reform to the entire judicial process. As you reflect on this powerful story of defiance, transformation, and hope, ask yourself, in a system where rules sometimes serve to conceal injustice rather than correct it, how far would you go to ensure that every person is treated with the dignity they deserve?